The moment we in the watch world have waited for all year long has come and gone. Rolex's new releases created very little splash. It was not what we had expected. It was not this grand moment, but I do think in its nuance, there were a lot of really interesting releases and maybe some discontinuations as well. So today we'll do part one of a two-part series analyzing Rolex's 2024 product strategy, some of their most exciting new releases. Exciting is a comparable term as I'm using it, but we'll be talking about the Daytona today, the 1908, and the GMT. And it's kind of in that order from most exciting to maybe most underwhelming, but there is a little sprinkle of beauty in each of these different things. Let's start off with the Le Mans Daytona. This is a watch that was released less than a year ago, and it's now been discontinued, making it, I believe, the shortest production run for any modern Rolex in modern history. Pretty interesting how they've done that. The watch came out to commemorate the anniversary of the Le Mans race. It was totally unexpected. It fell outside of Rolex's release schedule, which is a very mechanical, predictable, planned schedule, right? Rolex releasing this in an unexpected manner was bizarre. It was absolutely bizarre. It does fit into a pattern that we thought we saw later on with the Vienna Philharmonic when Rolex dropped that day date, or with the Oscars day date, which we were wrong about. We'll talk all about that in a coming episode. But this Le Mans Daytona really, as someone put it recently, was actually Nico on an episode of The Zero. Sign on to The Zero and join as a member in the episode that we just released. But the Le Mans is basically, maybe the most, rare, collectible, modern Rolex out there, arguably, but it is certainly the Rolex that functionally knights somebody, right? If you were allocated a Le Mans, that means that you are basically a best friend of Rolex, right? It's undisclosed how many were made, but only real big players got them, both inside the watch world on the media side, like Ben Clymer got one, to celebrities, I'm sure to royalty as well. But what was interesting about this watch? Well, again, not just the release strategy, which was in and of itself intriguing, but also the dial. This is a throwback watch, right? This is an exotic sub-dialed, design. Definitely a nod to the Paul Newman Daytonas of past. Really interesting, really beautiful, a bit unprecedented. Rolex does tend to lean back on historical design, yes, but they do not tend to make direct allusion, right? They don't tend to reissue. This is a bit on the nose for a brand like Rolex. Well, the watch has been discontinued. Now, the interesting part of this conversation is, there are rumors the watch was reintroduced in yellow gold. I don't know if this is true. It's not being covered by any watch blog, so I will not say it is news at the time of recording. This is right now, as we speak, the Tuesday, April 9th. So I don't know if the yellow gold Le Mans is real. It very well could just be, deceptive Photoshop being perpetrated by people who do promote deceptive Photoshop all the time, I think with malintent regularly. So I don't know, but that has happened, right? The watch has certainly been discontinued. It is off the Rolex website. That's another interesting thing. A lot of, Rolex just kind of, when they discontinue a watch, there's no announcement. They just remove it from the website. Kind of cool. There's really no buzz about it. It takes someone really looking and combing and checking, right, for, is it still there? Is it still there, right? Pretty interesting. Moving on to not a discontinuation, but a release. This is the second generation, the second year, and in that, the second generation of Rolex's 1908. I think the 1908 release of 2023 was something that, if you liked it, it probably meant that you were kind of just being a hipster. I think that the more reasonable approach, the more reasonable opinion was very similar to the Code 1159. Although I think the 1159 was far more intelligent than the 1908, but the fair opinion was, they're pretty reflected, which I think would have been interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops over the next 5 years. This maybe has something cool in it, and we'll see how it develops. Some people rushed to the 1908 and said, oh, this is the greatest thing, Rolex, this is so cool, no one's talking about it. It's not that cool. It was never that cool. It was kind of boring. In fact, it may have even been a downgrade from the Cellini, specifically Cellini moon phase. Not a big 1908 fan, guys. I don't really care. I think that Rolex could have, really introduced something far more interesting. Instead of the 1908, really going back to the Cellini era of the 70s, right? Really just kind of decadent, super low production. I'm talking about, Midas watches, lapis lazuli dials. Again, really low production. I think it is obvious that Rolex continues to manufacture watches that are like really low production, and now they're promoting them more than ever, right? We saw this with their Daytona, which we'll talk about on an episode, next episode, part 2. But they're promoting watches that you probably can't get. That's a big thing for Rolex now, right? They're really leaning into their identity, their modern identity, which they kind of fell into, which is like, you will never get this, right? Like Borat, right? That's kind of like what Rolex is doing. And that's the game Rolex is playing, right? They, like all brands, ought to be, but Rolex has a really good shot at everything they produce has the ability to become a future collectible. I mean, you look at something so obvious like the Le Mans. I mean, that watch God knows what it'll do in value, right? The original retail was like $52,000. I saw them for sale well above $250,000, $300 and something thousand. These are crazy prices, right? And really, they're just on par with what we see in the vintage Daytona world, right? The world has become awake to the investability of vintage Rolex watches, and frankly, it's been fairly recent, right? The art world is a far more evolved, mature, collectible world, a world that, unless you're sitting on dozens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, you can't really afford to break into that world, right? But that doesn't mean you can't invest in it. It doesn't mean that you can't hop aboard some of those terrific investments through our friends over at Masterworks. Masterworks, through enabling diversified ownership, gives everyone the opportunity, all you need is a Masterworks account, to invest in blue chip artwork from some of the world's greatest artists, like Pablo Picasso, Banksy, Andy Warhol, and so many more. Last year, while stocks and real estate saw historic losses, the big 3 auction houses posted revenues of a combined $17.7 billion, the best auction year ever. Blue chip whole contemporary art has now outpaced the S&P 500 for the last 27 years by an impressive 136%. It's amazing to see the consistent growth in the art world. And luckily for you, art investing isn't just reserved for the ultra rich anymore. Securitization has opened a pathway for the average investor to invest in art directly from your smartphone. Masterworks has sold over $55 million worth of art, and the net proceeds have paid out to over 62,000 investors. And these investors weren't art experts, and they didn't need to be because they had Masterworks. Masterworks offerings have sold out in minutes, but our subscribers can get priority access to skip that line and invest with Masterworks today. And all you have to do to skip that wait list and explore this whole world of investment is go to masterworks.art/Theo Harris. That's masterworks.art/Theo Harris. Head on over and take a look at some amazing opportunities. Back into Rolex. I don't think anyone really is going to want this watch at scale. That being said, pretty cool. Definitely an improvement over the classic, the original 1908 from last year. It's being done in platinum now. It's being done with a classic ice blue dial, and it's being done with hand guilloche, which they're calling rice grain. 39 millimeters, great proportions. I think 8 millimeters thick. Great watch, no question. I think at $29,000, it represents actually a lot of value compared to Patek Philippe's Calatrava at $32,100. I think that Rolex actually did a good job with this watch. I still don't think it's exciting, but I don't really think that a modern Calatrava is all that exciting either. It's just the Calatrava in the Patek world is such a significant piece. It's not an afterthought, right? Whereas with the Cellini, with the 1908, it's become an afterthought. So Patek can kind of produce a fairly boring Calatrava, but they're riding off of so many decades of investment into being a brand that sells a Calatrava that it still makes sense. Rolex has always had a hard time selling these watches in their end of the showcase, right? When you walked into a Rolex boutique in the height of COVID, when, you had to stay 6 feet away, but people were begging for watches, would do anything for a watch, you could still get a Cellini, and it wasn't hard. And you can get an amazing Cellini, right? The interesting part about this 1908 is the way Rolex is billing it as a tribute to classic art of watchmaking. That is a bit of a nod. Maybe I'm reading too far into it, but maybe it's an allusion to the fact or the notion that Rolex will continue this 1908 line and have it serve like high-end watchmaking, as opposed to the rest of their collection, which is more, as we've discussed, like expensive luxury, but like pseudo-utility kind of thing, right? There's nothing apart from the metal very luxurious about a solid gold Submariner, right? A Submariner is a tool watch. The movements are great and high in technology, but they're not craftsman hand finished. They're movements that Rolex had insisted for years they wouldn't even show off, right? With an exhibition case back, right? They're movements that now, when they do an exhibition case back at their Daytona, they make custom rotors, right, to make the movements more beautiful. The point is, Rolexes, as we know them, no matter how expensive they are really not, right, outside of their material, right, precious material or gem set. They're not like, pieces of high horology. The 1908 collection could give way to that, right? I do see in the future complications coming to the 1908, right? Rolex has only ever manufactured, I think, 3 references ever, all in the late 40s or late 50s, Padalone and those other little pieces, I forget the references, that were complicated, right? Triple calendars, I believe they were, not annual, not perpetual, but triple. I do see that coming in the future, right? Not next year, it could be 5 or 10 years away, but maybe the 1908 is the door, right, into that very long-term future. No, I don't know. The third is the GMT. The Rolex GMT Master, a lot was expected this year, right? We expected discontinuation of the Pepsi and an introduction of the Coke. We didn't see any of that, right? There's no Coke in the Rolex collection, although we have found it in Tudor, and the Pepsi still exists. To what degree, we don't know, right? Rumors have been that Rolex is decreasing, production quantities of the Pepsi for a while now. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I believe it is true. But now we're seeing Rolex introduce the GMT with a new bezel variation. Well, it's really a bezel variation that they introduced last year with in two-tone, right? This gray and black. I really like this bezel combo. It's definitely dull. It's definitely, it flies under the radar, much as a Rolex can, offered now in Oyster and in Jubilee. I think that's cool, right? They're not playing hard to get. You can have it in either bracelet. That's very classic. That they've been doing that since the 80s. But yeah, there's nothing really to talk about here. I like the fact that the text is green. I'm a sucker for the green text, right? I love all things green Rolex. I love my green OP. I love the Hulk Submariner. I'm big for the green, but I'm also just big in contrast text. I'm big into little differences in watches, which really brings us into the last part of today's conversation, which is this amazing Rolex Explorer 2. The reference is 216570. This is a modern watch, and which makes this watch so special, not only the condition and the fact that these watches are just fantastic. These are 42 millimeter Oysters that I think are, they're beautiful, but they're grossly overlooked, right? A lot of folks don't even take the time to stop and consider this watch when sometimes a Submariner maybe is a little bit too small or just to try on this extra Oyster case. It's an amazing fitting watch. I think that this watch fits just as well as my GMT. And this is 42 and that's 40, right? I think it's because of the lug proportions. These watches are beautiful, but what makes this piece so interesting is the patina. And that's not a word that you're used to hearing, right, when we're talking about modern Rolex. Patina is something that we associate with vintage Rolex, right? When the dials and the prints and the bezels were made of materials that were susceptible to aging. Now that doesn't really happen, but it did happen here. The Explorer 2, this reference, the text is in orange. It's in a bright orange normally, or it ought to be. But in this very rare example, I have never seen this before. The text has faded from a bright orange to a very beautiful, subtle, very Easter-like yellow. It's absolutely stunning. The orange hand has also faded a little bit, but it's remained kind of a light orange. But it's that yellow that's just unbelievable. I bought this from the original owner that golfed a lot. He claimed that he associated the patina to the golf course, right? That was when he was in the sun most. That's when the watch had the most exposure to the sun, to the fading. And then this very rare faulty paint or sealant allowed the sun to, basically fade the print. Very unusual, very cool. I adore this watch. When I saw this watch for the first time, I knew I had to have it. It took me a couple of months to buy it, but now it is available for sale in the Theo and Harris vintage watch shop. This isn't quite a vintage watch, but it's just it's an exception because it's so beautiful. So head on over to the Theo and Harris shop and explore this Rolex Explorer 2, as well as a bunch of other watches from, Patek Philippe and Cartier and Tudor and other Rolexes as well. We've got a lot of amazing stuff over there. So go ahead and take a look. And if you're not in the mood to buy a watch right now, definitely take a look at the strap shop because, I've just purchased so many different variations of straps because I love the strap world so much. I love the colors. I love everything about it. So the strap shop it's very evident that it was built by someone that has an addiction to color and material, right? So definitely go ahead and take a look. Thank you all, as always, for your support on this channel and for your support in the shop. I couldn't be more appreciative. I'll see you all very soon.